Most people think tanks won World War II. They're wrong. Tanks needed fuel. Soldiers needed food. Guns needed ammunition. None of that moved on its own. Behind every German advance from France to Russia was a massive fleet of trucks, cars, and carriers working around the clock. Without them, the whole war machine stops dead. This is every truck and car the Wehrmacht ever used. We start with light utility vehicles. Volkswagen Kübelwagen, the German Jeep. This was the most common light vehicle in the entire German military. Simple, light, and surprisingly tough. It worked in the African desert, the Russian snow, and everything in between. Mechanics loved it because fixing it was easy. Soldiers loved it because it almost never broke down. It became the face of German mobility in the war. Volkswagen Schwimmwagen, the swimming car. Same basic design as the Kübelwagen, but with one major difference. It could drive straight into a river and keep going. A small propeller at the back pushed it through the water. Reconnaissance teams used it to cross rivers without waiting for a bridge. Fast, light, and genuinely useful in ways most vehicles never were. WW Type 87, the commander's car. A four-wheel drive version of the Beetle built specifically for officers who needed to go off-road. Standard sedans would get stuck in mud and sand. This one kept moving. Senior commanders used it to reach forward positions that normal staff cars could never reach. Steyr 1500A, the Austrian. Built in Austria and powered by an air-cooled engine. That engine detail mattered a lot in North Africa, where extreme heat destroyed water-cooled engines constantly. The Steyr handled the desert better than most German-designed vehicles. It carried troops, towed light guns, and served as a staff car all at once. Horch 108, the heavy staff car. Big, powerful, and built for officers who needed something more than a light utility car. The Horch 108 could carry several passengers plus gear over rough ground without any problems. It was often used as a command vehicle right behind the front line. Reliable enough that commanders trusted it in situations where breaking down was not an option. Mercedes-Benz 320, the officer's choice. A step up from the standard military vehicles. Senior officers wanted something that reflected their rank, and the Mercedes 320 delivered that. Powerful engine, smooth ride, and enough room for maps, radios, and a full staff. It needed regular maintenance, but in the right hands it stayed running for years. Mercedes-Benz 770, the parade car. This was not a combat vehicle. It was built for ceremonies, parades, and state events. Massive, heavily armored in some versions, and reserved for the very top of the German command. It was more symbol than tool. Moving an army takes more than staff cars and utility vehicles. It takes trucks. Thousands of them. The Wehrmacht needed a constant flow of food, fuel, and ammunition reaching the front every single day. These are the trucks that kept that flow moving. Opel Blitz 3.6, the backbone. If there is one truck that defines German logistics in World War II, it is this one. The Opel Blitz carried everything everywhere. Ammunition, food, soldiers, medical supplies, fuel. Tens of thousands were produced, and they showed up on every single front from Norway to North Africa. Simple to drive, easy to fix, and built in numbers that no other German truck could match. Opel Blitz 4x4, the mud fighter. The standard Blitz struggled badly in the deep mud of the Eastern Front. So Germany built this four-wheel drive version specifically for Russia. It could push through terrain that stopped the regular version completely. Soviet roads were not really roads at all, and this truck was the answer to that problem. Mercedes-Benz L3000, the competitor. This was the main rival to the Opel Blitz, and it was just as capable. 3-ton capacity, reliable engine, and used across every theater. Some units actually preferred it over the Blitz because of how well it handled rough roads. Mercedes built it in large numbers, and the Army used every single one. Ford G917T, the American-built German truck. Ford had a factory in Germany before the war, and that factory kept producing trucks for the Wehrmacht. This was the result. It used American engineering inside a German military truck. Tough, capable, and slightly better in some conditions than the purely German designs. Nobody cared where the engineering came from as long as it ran. Borgward B3000, the reliable one. Not as famous as the Blitz, but just as important. The Borgward was a solid 3-ton truck that handled long-distance supply runs well. It was not flashy, and it did not need to be. Units that had them kept them running for years with basic maintenance. Phantom and Granite, the light hauler. A smaller truck used for lighter loads and shorter distances. Medical units loved it because its suspension was soft enough to carry wounded soldiers without making their injuries worse. It served as an ambulance more than anything else and saved a lot of lives doing exactly that. Light and medium trucks handled most of the daily supply work. But some jobs needed something much bigger. Heavy guns, tank parts, massive ammunition loads. That required a completely different class of vehicle. And when the roads disappeared entirely, the Wehrmacht turned to something no other army used at the same scale. Half-tracks. Mercedes-Benz L4500, the heavy hauler. 4.5 tons of carrying capacity. This was the truck units called when the load was too heavy for anything else. Long-distance supply runs, oversized equipment, bulk ammunition. It was expensive to build and needed skilled mechanics, but when the job demanded raw carrying power, nothing else came close. Mercedes-Benz L6500, the Giant. The largest truck in the entire German fleet. Built for jobs that would destroy smaller vehicles. Moving entire artillery batteries, massive fuel loads, and equipment that weighed more than most trucks could handle. It was slow on bad roads, but on paved highways it could move enormous amounts of supplies in a single run. Henschel 33, the six-wheeler. A six-wheeled heavy truck that showed up early in the war and never really left. Its extra axle gave it better stability under heavy loads. Units on the Eastern Front valued it specifically because 6 wheels meant better traction in mud and snow compared to standard 4-wheeled trucks. Tatra 111, the Czech Giant. Built in Czechoslovakia and powered by an air-cooled engine that could survive extreme cold and extreme heat equally well. The Tatra 111 was so well designed that production actually continued after the war ended. German units discovered quickly that it outperformed many of their own heavy trucks in the worst conditions Russia could produce. SD, KZ. 7, the artillery half-track. This is where half-tracks begin. The SD, KZ. 7 was a medium half-track built specifically to tow heavy artillery pieces that no wheeled truck could pull through soft ground. It carried the gun crew in the back and pulled the gun behind it. Famous 88mm anti-aircraft guns were towed almost exclusively by this vehicle throughout the entire war. 9 FAMA, the heaviest of all. 18 tons. That is how much this machine weighed, and it needed every bit of that weight to do its job. The FAMA was the only vehicle in the German inventory capable of recovering a Tiger tank from the battlefield. When the heaviest tanks broke down or got stuck, this machine came to drag them out. Nothing else could. Trucks and half-tracks moved the bulk of everything. But speed mattered too. Messages needed delivering fast, roads needed scouting, and commanders needed information before the enemy could react. That is where motorcycles came in. And when tanks broke down on the battlefield, a completely different kind of vehicle had to go get them. BMW R75, the best military motorcycle ever built. This was not just a motorcycle. It had a driven sidecar wheel, which meant all 3 wheels pulled together. It could go off-road in conditions that would stop a normal bike completely. The sidecar carried a second soldier and often a machine gun. Reconnaissance units used it to scout ahead of the main advance, and it became one of the most recognized vehicles of the entire war. Zundap KS750, the rival. Built by a different company but almost identical in capability to the BMW R75. The two designs were actually developed together under a German military contract to make sure spare parts worked in both bikes. Units that had Zundaps were just as capable as units running BMWs. Together, these two motorcycles defined how German reconnaissance operated across every front. DKWNZ 350, the workhorse bike. Lighter and simpler than the big military motorcycles. Military police used it constantly for controlling traffic and road discipline behind the front lines. Couriers used it to carry orders between headquarters when radio communication was not available. It was not exciting, but it was everywhere, and it kept information moving when nothing else could. Panzer IV, the tank saver. When a Panzer IV broke down or took a hit and could not move, this vehicle came to recover it. Built on the same chassis as the tank itself, it had enough power to drag a damaged tank off the battlefield and back to the repair workshops. Losing a tank to enemy fire was bad enough. Losing one to a breakdown that could have been fixed was unacceptable. Schwerer Wehrmacht Schlepper, the late war carrier. Built late in the war as a simpler replacement for the complicated half-track designs. It was fully tracked, which gave it better mobility in deep mud. It carried supplies and towed artillery at the same time. Easier to build than earlier half-tracks and just as capable in the field. Landungsfahr, the river ferry. When the army needed to cross a river with tanks and heavy vehicles, bridges were not always available. This amphibious ferry worked in pairs to create a floating platform strong enough to carry armored vehicles across. Engineers used it on the Eastern Front constantly where rivers blocked every major advance. Germany built thousands of vehicles, but the war consumed them faster than any factory could replace them. So the Wehrmacht did something practical. They took every usable truck and car captured from defeated armies and put them straight to work. French, British, Soviet, Italian. If it had wheels and an engine, it joined the German supply chain. Renault H, the French workhorse. When France fell in 1940, Germany captured enormous stocks of these trucks. The cab sat forward over the engine, which made it look more modern than most German designs at the time. Occupation forces in France used them heavily because spare parts were easy to find locally. Thousands stayed in service for years after the fall of France. Citroën U23, the simple French truck. Simple, durable, and easy to maintain. German logistics units grabbed every one they could find. It needed almost no special tools to repair, which made it perfect for field workshops operating far from proper supply depots. French civilian mechanics could keep them running, which saved German maintenance crews for more complex vehicles. Studebaker US-6, the American truck in German hands. America supplied the Soviet Union with these trucks in massive numbers. Germany captured significant quantities on the Eastern Front. German drivers quickly realized these American-built trucks were better than many of their own designs. More reliable, stronger, and easier to start in extreme cold. Captured Studebakers were immediately put to work and never sat idle. ZIS-5, the Soviet standard. The most common Soviet truck on the Eastern Front. Rugged beyond belief and designed specifically to survive Russian winters that destroyed more sophisticated vehicles. German units valued captured ZIS-5 trucks precisely because they worked in conditions where German trucks gave up. Simple engines, strong frames, and parts that could be found everywhere in Russian territory. Bedford QL, the British four-wheeler. Captured mainly in North Africa and during the fall of France. Four-wheel drive and a powerful engine made it genuinely useful in desert conditions. Afrika Korps units used captured Bedfords alongside their own vehicles without any problems because the truck was that well built. Germany started the war with the most organized military transport system in the world. By the end, they were running on captured trucks, worn-out half-tracks, and borrowed time. The vehicles never stopped moving. But eventually the fuel ran out, the roads got bombed, and the army that depended on logistics lost because its logistics finally collapsed. That is the real story of how Germany lost World War II.